Well, let me just start off by saying bravo
Okay.
for finishing this book.
Thanks.
I mean, it's a long time coming, and especially bravo for finishing The Locked Room because I think that's the longest work I've ever seen of yours. Right? Is that the longest thing you've ever done?
Oh, by far.
Was that a challenge to do you understand
Yeah.
what you're taking on?
It's just enormous challenge, just enormous. I just never, I didn't, it's not like I didn't think I had it in me. It's more like, uh, it's time to step up to the plate and do it, you
Right.
know. So, yeah, and I've never had a tremendous amount of confidence in my drawing. So this kind of has elevated my own feeling of like capability.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's a good feeling.
Yeah, I know you're a formalist as like an artist. Like you're all about the design, the page layout.
Yeah, so I studied at the School of Visual Arts, I was working during the day.
Hmm.
Most during that time I was teaching and go run in after school, as my recollection was, and taking these classes for it was like a couple of semesters with Eisner and Kurtzman and Spiegelman and uh, you know, I would say Kurtzman had the most profound impact on my work as a reader.
Mm.
I mean, to be in, for me, he's really my uh, god of comics, I guess. And it's because for all of those formal reasons.
Yeah.
But I learned more from reading Harvey's comics and being with him. But I mean, for me to be in the same room with Harvey was just like, I never thought such a thing could ever happen in my life.
Yeah.
But in terms of learning, uh, really the my growth as a student was in the Spiegelman's class.
Hmm.
Arts, everyone knows Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist, et cetera, et cetera. But like he is a really, really good teacher. And I learned so much being in his classroom. He was doing a survey of the history of comics, and I walked in there and it's like, you can't tell me anything I don't already know, right?
Hmm.
And then he starts, deconstructing things and talking about influences and obscure shit that didn't know anything about. And just to be in that kind of, you know, it just it changed my life,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
uh,
But you,
profoundly.
but you were a graphic design student, right?
Yeah, I had studied graphic design at Pratt.
Hmm.
And I got out of Pratt and I freelanced for a while. And this is before computers. There's no Photoshop. So I was actually doing paste up, you know,
Hmm.
like literally pasting up little blocks of type for like the World Health Organization, not even designing brochures, like just putting catalog listings on for reproduction.
Hmm.
And I was very depressing period of my life when I realized I just studied graphic design and it was going to be take decades before I designed a Rolling Stones cover, if ever.
Yeah.
And then that really kind of set upon me. I was like, wait a second. I didn't even like the Rolling Stones that much. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what is graphic design after all, but making other people's crap look good?
Hmm.
So it was a very bad period of my life. But I ultimately realized that being a graphic designer, having some of those chops absolutely informed my comics.
But then you have all this knowledge of graphic design, and then you're going in and taking Art Spiegelman's classes, and he's showing you how graphic design can work with comics, like how comics can be graphic design.
Yeah.
And then that becomes kind of like you said, you didn't like your drawing style, or you're insecure about your drawing style or something, but you have so much design chops that kind of makes up for any insecurities you should have about your art style, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. Wasn't, it wasn't long after I was studying with Spiegelman that he invited me down to Green Street and meet Francoise. And the next thing I know, sort of three or four classes into this course, and they asked me to be the associate editor of Raw, and so I'm like working with these two brilliant people, and I begin to see that, oh, you don't, it's not really just about the drawing. I'm always growing up as a kid, I was really attracted to the drawing and drawing styles. And, like I read a lot of collected Marvel and DC comics. And to this day, unfortunately, my eye-brain connection can identify, an inker, even a letterer in like early 70s Marvel comics. But like for those guys, there was two things, and one was like it's not about the drawing, it's about thinking like a cartoonist. And if you can think like a cartoonist, then you might be able to become a cartoonist. And I was like, oh, right, of course. And then the reason why I name dropped those two and working for Raw is that the other thing that they modeled for me is that as you know this very well, is that you need to be able to sit alone in a dark room with a light and a ticking clock
Mhm.
for hours and hours. And it's an investment unlike anything else that I do and have ever done in my life. And that degree of compulsive dedication to just, putting in the hours.
Mhm.
And that's what I got from those experiences, all those things put together.
Yeah, well then so then later you kind of leave that though, and then you become a teacher at a prep school in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And that's the prequel to this book is one of
Yeah.
your students is the son of Paul Auster, Daniel Auster. He tells you about his father being an author, but I guess Paul wasn't very well known at the time as
All
a.
he had written at that point, he'd written one sort of memoir,
Mhm.
translated some poems and whatnot, but the New York Trilogy was his first uh, real major publication. And they came out consecutively, City of Glass, Ghosts in the Lock Room in the early 80s.
Mhm.
And so I'd heard that this wonderful student of mine had a father who was a writer, but he wasn't, capital P Paul, capital A Auster. He was just some writer in Brooklyn. But I thought, oh, well, I'll read his books before, he shows up for parent-teacher conferences. And when he comes in, you know, I'll kiss his ass a little bit.
Yeah, right, right, right. Wait,
And in doing so, I always have a sketchbook nearby, and just like a little sketchbook. And
okay.
I read the first book, I thought City of Glass. I made some notes to myself about how it could be turned into a comic. Just some like a couple of little kind of really doodles more than anything else,
Hmm.
but really kind of thinking about the second chapter of City of Glass. And then Auster came in, and there was so much to talk about the pipsqueak, as Auster called him, son, that we never even I don't even think I brought up the subject that I had read his books.
Huh.
There was no need to. We just kind of hit it off, and you know, I, that was it. And then years go by, and I've moved out of Brooklyn, and I'm living in the country, and the phone rings, and it's Spiegelman, and he says, blah blah blah. We're just sort of shooting the shit, and he said, the reason why I'm calling you is that I'm helping a publisher in New York uh, adapt some contemporary noir fiction into graphic novels. And we've chosen the first one of this potential series is just impossible to do. And that's why we chose it, because we've had a couple of different artists come in and try it. And yeah, it's just, I thought it might be in your wheelhouse. And I was like, well, okay, wait, what's the book? And he said, City of Glass.
Huh.
My jaw dropped. And I said, you mean City of Glass by Paul Auster? And he said, yes. And I said, well, I've already started, you know
Yeah.
went down to the basement and got the sketchbook. And, it was
Um,
just kind of meant to be.
was there something about City of Glass that when you were reading it, like you just thought this would lend itself terrifically to adapting into a comic? It just seemed visual to you?
Yeah, I guess it seemed visual to me. But the funny thing is, though, that the sketch that I was fooling around with was the second chapter of the book,
Hmm.
which is a monologue, sort of a monologue by a character in the book who's been a young man who's been abused by his father. And it's just 20 pages or something of the guy talking. And I thought, I just made some notes, really sketchy notes about how you could translate a prose monologue into uh, images and comics. And I sort of made some associated images. And it was part also, I was trying to understand what the chapter was about. It's a very intriguing chapter. And so that was really the basis. And evidently, that was actually the part that had stuck the few artists who had taken a stab at it before me was this, roadblock, chapter two.
Well, and you showed this to Spiegelman, and he was like, "That's it. That's great."
That's what happened.
What was Spiegelman's involvement with the book beyond just kind of bringing people together to do the book?
Well, that was about it. He was helping out a friend of his who was an editor, a guy named Bob Callahan, and he was just trying to, help him do this. And when I did the sketch for that chapter,
Hmm.
and then he was like, "Okay, we'll just go ahead." And so I did a whole sketch of the book, version of the book, and then and this is like I say, this is before Photoshop, so it's all done by hand, and tweaked it in there, and the lettering is all by hand, and it's on a yellow legal pad, and very, very old school. Um, and I did a sketch of it. Now they already had David Mazzucchelli
Hmm.
lined up to do the final art, thank
Hmm.
God,
Yeah.
because I mean, New York City is one of the main characters of the entire trilogy, but certainly City of Glass.
Hmm.
And David had spent years drawing Daredevil and, Batman. Really, the only Batman you need to read if
Hmm.
you're interested in reading Batman is Batman Year One. It's, really great piece of work. And he could draw the hell out of New York City. So, in my scribbles, I kind of avoid trying to draw brownstones and cityscapes. And David like does his version of my sketch, and suddenly, oh, there's New York. It's
Yeah.
magnificent. And he just adds air to the whole thing. Oh my God. And then he did his final sketch of the book, handed it back to me. I drew on some of his drawings. We went back and forth, and it went super fast. Like this whole thing is like meant to be, like it couldn't have happened any other way than the way it happened. It really feels, again, I keep saying this, but I feel like even today, like I'm a character in some Paul Auster novel. This book originally wasn't supposed to come out in uh, from Pantheon. Like I
Oh,
didn't even, it was going to come out from Auster's publisher, and one thing led to another, and it, it ended up in Pantheon. But that route itself is like an Auster, series of bizarre coincidences. Anyhow,
okay.
so we finally finished get back to your question. Um, so now we had a sketch version of the entire City of Glass, since this is around, 1992, 93, something like that. And we went to Spiegelman's loft and for the read through of the sketch, David and I, with Oster and Spiegelman, and oh, I remember this day so well. I was so intimidated. It was kind of terrifying because they hadn't all art. I think at that point, all art had seen was sort of my first stab at the first couple of chapters, but uh, he hadn't seen David's sketch, which was so great. And so we're sitting in the loft, and you know. Page one, and oh, there it is, page one. And Spiegelman immediately is like, it's Art Spiegelman. So it's like, oh, well, how about you guys, what if you were to pull out a little bit here and maybe have the character, move from the left to the right instead of the right to the left? Yeah, great suggestion. Page two. And he's like, definitely you need to establish the shot here, get this a little bit longer. And okay, page three, this is really good, but look, if you move this panel here, you could open up some real estate over here. Like one great suggestion after another. I mean, really. And meanwhile, Oster's sitting over there with like, the black cigar
Uh-huh.
and the cup of black coffee, and just kind of like and not saying nothing. And I'm like, oh shit, I think he doesn't I don't think maybe he doesn't like it. We get page 10, page 12, and he's saying nothing. And Dave and I are just kind of sweating. He's like, and then like page 15 comes around and he's like, wait, and pause. There's a pregnant pause. And he points and he says, this here, that should be a colon, not a semicolon. Oh, okay. Colon. Got it. Okay. Next, a couple of pages later, wait a second, you got the tense wrong here. This should be the past tense, not the, he was just completely focused on the language,
Yeah.
which makes sense because he get the basically Noah, the rule that he gave us, he said, do whatever you want to do, but don't alter a single word. Every word in the adaptation has to be a word that I wrote.
Okay, but what about you taking out words? He's okay with that? Like you deleting section?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Did he
Which
have to
turned out
okay?
to be a real trick as we went along, because with City of Glass, there's actually some texts shifts are not so in order.
Hmm.
But with the subsequent books, I really was determined to have, it could be 3 pages from 3 words from page 18, and then 1 word on page 20, and then a paragraph from page 24. Like I was determined to make the words all in order. It's insane.
Wow. And so with David, I'm not super familiar about David Mazzucchelli's career. Was he done with mainstream comics at this point?
Yeah, he was done with the mainstream comics at this point. I think he had published a couple of issues of Rubber Blanket, maybe all of them. I'm not sure what he was up to at that point. I think, but I'm pretty sure he was all done with the Batman and the Daredevil stuff.
And he was he was receptive to Art Spiegelman's criticism or not criticism, but
Yeah,
edits and
suggestions.
yeah,
Yeah,
suggestions.
yeah. And then, because it was such a collaborative process,
Hmm.
then we went back with the sketch again and folded in some of Spiegelman's idea and gave us some new ideas. And, it just kind of got better. And then David just like sat down and drew the thing in like a record time. I don't know. It was like a year and a half or something. It's just insane. And it's all by hand.
Yeah. And it's amazing because when you first look at the opening of his work is tighter, and then as the character's losing his mind, his brush strokes are getting looser and looser, and it's so gestural by the end of it. And you're just like,
Absolutely.
that's such a sort of subliminal thing that he's doing there visually. Like,
Absolutely. Well, the whole structure of it was based on that. That was one of the central ideas from the beginning.
mm-hmm,
We started the book with this, very rigid 9-panel grid. Once again, straight out of Kurtzman, right?
mm-hmm,
No, this sort of thing, and it was symbolic of the rigidity of this character's um, life. And then we started to let's see if I can find an example um, where we actually um, hid the we'd hide the grid within the grid. Yeah. So like here, there's the 9-panel grid. And then inside of it, there's the 9-panel grid again. Uh, there's a few more examples of that sort of thing going on. And there it is again. Here, yeah. Uh, like that. There's the 9-panel grid is behind this page, but there's the 9-panel grid here. So that when it goes to the end, when we go to the end, the very end of the book, things start getting really wonky. David's drawing style gets wonky too. And then like the gutter gets bigger, and suddenly, you know, the there's these panels are all drawn with a ruler, but then this last one is drawn by hand, and
mm-hmm.
they start to wiggle around, and then eventually this guy's completely become unglued, and the panels themselves become unglued as they drift off the page. Yeah, so that's
Brilliant.
sort of like the hidden conceit there.
Did you have any of that stuff in your thumbnails for the
Oh
original?
yeah, that's all my idea.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah.
then how loose were your thumbnails at the time? Like, would you be like, this is you just write city background,
Yeah, I mean, it was just kind of a yeah, city background, exactly.
city
But,
background
but
here.
but that's not to say, I mean, like what David brought to this is like some of the fundamental ideas may have been mine, but what David brought to it was vastly improved
Mhm.
on my sketch, and in places where especially where he just opened up. Like, I don't think, for instance, just this end sequence, I don't think I had this establishing shot of the interior of the house take up a whole page, you know? And this is like brilliant because it's the beginning of the final act.
Mhm.
And it just gives you a whole, it's take the reader can take a deep breath. You feel you're coming in for a landing, and it sets up the rest of the interior of the space, as well as just creating an atmosphere. He's just a master storyteller. It was a real pleasure to work with him.
Uh, did Paul Auster, did he recognize you at Spiegelman's house? Was he like, oh yeah, like you were my son's teacher?
Well, yeah, I mean, the subject came up. I think Art had, we'd been back and forth a little bit, so in between when I took a stab at the book.
Okay. And then back then in 1994, the book, so it would have been received kind of, I mean, was it even getting press at the time? How would people even
It
understand?
actually got, surprisingly enough, it got a piece in Newsweek, which was
Wow.
actually something that people read back in 1994, and something in the New York Times book review as well.
Hmm.
But then it would end up in a bookstore, and there'd be no place to put it. You'd like put it next to Mouse, or
Hmm.
so you generally next to Auster's other novels
Hmm.
in the fiction section. But the only people who really paid any attention to it ultimately were like guys like you,
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
people who were into comics,
Yeah, I've
or
heard
people who were into Auster too, which
I've
was
heard that those raw Penguin editions, those books. I've heard those they would just be, shelved with like gaming books or something. They just
right,
didn't know what to do with them. There was no section. It was like,
right,
what do we hear with the Dungeons and Dragons books?
exactly.
So, did you have a plan even back then to finish the trilogy? Was that like
No,
no?
no,
So
absolutely
when
not.
did that come back up?
Well, I guess it was sort of in the back of my head that there were these other two books left to adapt into comics. Um, they always hung out in the back of my head, but I started to travel. Maybe this is about 15 years ago, and I started to travel with them. Like I take them if I was going abroad or going across the country, sometime when I just had some time to just sit down and read and kind of ponder. And I couldn't quite figure out what they were really about. Like City of Glass to me, I understood what it fundamentally was about. I mean, these books sort of travel on a couple of different levels, and the plot of City of Glass is very compelling. But it's also like the idea of the nature of fiction, and if this is no longer called a pencil, is it still a pencil? And this guy's leading this fictive life, and it's just about the nature of fiction in general, and then finding a way of translating those ideas into a picture language.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, so then the other two books remained elusive to me, and I remember I was teaching in this French town called Angoulême, where the International Comics Festival is, and I was walking along a river. And I was thinking about City of Glass and fiction, and suddenly, like a light went off. And I just kind of understood what the other two books were really about. And when I did a little bit of sketching then, but it was more like I had this idea, and it got home, and at one point after that return from that trip, I called Oster up and talked to him about what I was thinking, and he said, "Well, yeah, that's pretty much it." So if you want to take a shot, go ahead. What the hell?
And that
So
was as the idea was, I'm going to do this as one book, compile them all together.
no, no, and that didn't happen till later. I was just going to adapt the other two
Hmm.
one by one. I assumed that they were all going to be separate editions. That
Hmm.
that that whole, that didn't really happen until we went over to Pantheon, and they were like, "Oh, this makes sense. We can do this as a book."
Yeah, it makes sense because there's a paperback of the Paul Auster trilogy, and that's the New York trilogy, and everybody's familiar with that. I mean, that's the one you're going to
Right.
find on the shelf.
exactly.
So I think it works. It makes sense as one book, and there are so many connections between the stories that you kind of need them all together. It's yeah, I don't know. I think it's nice to have them all together like that because it'll help you read the whole thing together and pick up on what the common threads are and things like that. I don't know. I think
Well,
it's
did you, have you read the whole thing together? Did
I
you read
have,
it?
yeah, yeah.
Because you're one of the few people I've actually spoken to
Yeah,
who's read it.
so in my notes here, I wrote like identity is a common theme, storytelling is a common theme, stories within stories, one person following another. It's just kind of a search for meaning.
Mhm.
These kinds of, these is the threads, and then there are characters that kind of show up in each story. Stillman, for example, and things like that.
So,
And so I think I wouldn't have paid as much attention if it was three separate books and I just kind of picked them up like that.
did it seem to you like did it's not like a trilogy generally you think of as being, this big massive story arc with similar characters and the quest to find the thing or the multi-planet whatever.
Right.
Uh, uh, but in this case, I think Auster once referred to them as a triptych
Hmm.
more than a trilogy. And I'm just curious from your reading if you felt like it held together as even the three different styles and were
Yeah.
the
So it works as, it's funny because it in a strange way, it kind of works as a three-part play where the middle part is the darkest. Like it has like the middle story is the darkest story, which is the second act.
yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I think it holds together really well, and it's interesting the way that each of you, because you're all so different, all three of you as artists and storytellers and stuff. So I wondered if Matodi, well, first off, how did you get Matodi to do the second part? Was that tricky? Because he's a
Not at
huge,
all. Um, uh, because I had lived in Italy for a year with my family,
huh,
and it was a year that the Coconino edition of City of Glass had just come out. And so I did a lot of events with those guys, Matoti and Igort and Jippy and Baru, and it just with dumb luck of the draw. And I got to know these guys, wonderful guys. Uh, Became very chummy with Jippy, who I think is really one of the great living cartoonists.
hmm
But Matoti was from time to time would show up, and we became friendly. His English was good.
hmm
Uh, and I just always thought, I didn't always think when I did this, started doing the sketch for the second book, I was thinking of it more as sort of an illustrated text anyhow. Although
Okay.
the first version that I did of it was much more comic-y.
Uh-huh.
And when I showed it to Lorenzo, he was not so keen on drawing all those little pictures and making it super comic-y. And I thought, well, but he's interested in doing the book. Well, let's just push this further.
Hmm.
Since he really is such a magnificent illustrator,
Hmm.
let's make it more like an illustrated book. Uh, and because here's the thing is the middle book uh, for me, it's a very moving story about a guy who just gets completely another obsessed guy who makes kind of a bad choice without realizing it's a bad choice and neglects his life and neglects the love of his life and bit by bit just gets, lost in a mystery and loses his himself in it. Um, but the sub story of it for me is that it's about the nature of reading.
Hmm.
And so a lot of the pages, the first part of the book, this is the sort of the format is you got a picture and you get the text, and you get the picture and you get the text, and there's because it's Matodi, because the drawing is so evocative, you can't not read the text. You got to find out what these things illustrate. So it was, oh my God, when he came in with these illustrations. So I did a sketch version of this, and then his sketch version is just a million times better than mine because he's just but he then occasionally we start things start getting a little weird here and it gets a little herky jerky because we sort of the idea was to get the reader kind of lulled into this format
Hmm.
so that when we break into a page of comics, you're like, WTF, is this comics or is it an illustrated book? Because in fact, like this is the key sequence to this book. This guy, he's never the guy he's supposed to follow, all he does is read and write. And one of the books he's reading is Thoreau. And so the detective picks up this book by Thoreau, Walden. He's trying to understand it. And he's never tried to read anything below a surface level before. And so he reads this book and he gets so pissed off by it that he throws it against the wall. And then we go back to the same sort of lull the reader into this kind of, reading experience. And then, suddenly there's a page like this. And you're forced to, whether you're conscious of it or not, you're forced to confront the way that you read a text and the way that you interact with a text. And then suddenly there's two pages like this. We're like, ha ha, So I think that the idea, so when we got to these sorts of things, Metodi just followed my layout,
Uh-huh.
and then back to this, and it's just like Lorenzo taking my drawing and think, you know, I can do much better than that, and he does time and time again. It's breathtaking work. And
That
then the
must have
whole sort
been
of tour de force at the end was just that was my sketch.
okay. So you had the thumbnails that you sent him were grids, right? Like actual comic page thumbnail sketches, and then he.
No, no. The second version, the first version was looked a little more like City of Glass. But
Okay.
then when he was like, man, I don't really want to make comics, I was like, great. Let's not, let's go full tilt here. And I completely redesigned the thing.
And then what's it like for you to get a file from Metodi of like
Oh my God, it's like
drawings he's
Christmas.
done for you? That's like,
Yeah, it's like Christmas. I mean,
yeah,
God, it's just fabulous.
I can't
Yeah.
imagine, and I can't
Yeah.
imagine even trying to edit someone like him. I mean, that's
It wasn't unnecessary.
yeah,
Occasionally it would maybe a teeny tweak here or there, but so minor.
yeah.
And everything's delivered ready to go. You know,
Was
it's just
he was he familiar with that story with ghosts?
yeah, I think yeah, yes, he was. He had come to uh he came to we did David and Spiegelman and Oster and I did an event at Comic Arts Brooklyn, like I don't know, maybe it was 2018, something like that. I can't remember. And Metodi was there because the Spiegelmans and the Metodis are very, very friendly. And I hadn't seen him for a few years, and there he was. And so I knew that he was a fan of Auster's work and was hip to the sort of things we were doing. So
Hmm.
it was just seemed like a natural
Oh,
ask. And he didn't think twice. He just was like, I think it took a long time for the book to actually appear, in part because I had to draw mine,
hmm.
my third. So yeah, that just took a long time.
Okay, yeah. I was wondering if yours took how long it took you to do your section.
Yeah, yeah, a couple of years, start to finish, easily.
But then are you at what point do you begin as a designer to kind of conceptualize the book as an object? Is that always in the back of your mind?
No, in fact, the book itself as an object didn't come about until all the work was done,
Hmm.
and Pantheon was very strongly urging us to think about it as a single volume. Uh, um, it, it couldn't have happened any faster.
Hmm.
It just had to happen at the way it happened because even after we were generating the work and getting it together, and Metodi was maybe even done with his drawing, and we were still thinking it was going to be 3 volumes from Auster's publisher.
Mhm.
And then at a certain point, Auster wanted to do a book with his son-in-law, who's a photographer, about gun violence in America, which is a magnificent book, by the way, and very, powerful, very powerful work. And his publisher was like, well, we don't really do any art books. And meanwhile, I'd been meeting with an editor at his publisher. They'd given me a young editor who I met with twice and had no idea, hadn't even read City of Glass, knew nothing about comics. And at first I guess I was angry, but then I was resigned. And then I was felt, okay, well, I don't really need an editor anyhow. It's fine. We'll just make this thing happen. But when Oster had this idea of doing a photography book with his son-in-law, the publisher said, well, Paul, don't worry about it. We'll just take it and find another publisher. And he was friends with an editor, the editor-in-chief at Grove, and that book went there. And I thought, well, wait a second. Could I maybe wrest this book away from it? And my agent, Gail Hockman, and I kind of plotted on this thing, and she found a way. And one thing, and they just let us have it.
Wow.
They just let us have it. And as soon as and it was such an amazing, and like it couldn't have happened any sooner, couldn't happen any earlier. And when it was free, like the moment it was free, I called up Chip Kidd, who I knew, he's a huge Mazzucchelli fan,
Mhm.
because he's a huge Batman fan. And I knew, we talked about City of Glass. I'd met him a few times, friendly with Chip. And I called him up and I said, this is the story. And he's like, we can have all 3 books. And I was like, yeah. And Metodi and nah, nah, nah. And he's like, yeah, let's do it. Oh, okay, do it. Yeah. And so that's when we started talking about, designing the package.
Mhm. So,
So yeah, so the book design, let me just wrap up the book design.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so the trilogy is drawn by 3 different artists. And so David Mazzucchelli and Lorenzo Matodi, Paul Karasik, and then we have the back cover, which is the same guys. But all 3 of these guys wear this herringbone jacket, that had been there since the original sketch. And so when it came to design the book jacket itself, take off the paper. So it's got the herringbone print too, because it's a book jacket, right? And
Yeah.
I made a little faux uh, label, jacket label
Mhm.
to go on it. And what else? I mean, it's really nice, and it's kind of a textured cover. It feels a little bit like a jacket. And then here, there's a character who appears in all 3 books, but you never see him. He's just represented by Paul Auster's typewriter.
Mhm.
And Paul had a beloved Olympia typewriter, and so here's the here's the typewriter that is in all 3 books. But if you turn the book sideways, it becomes the paper comes out of the typewriter.
Oh, I
Right?
didn't even notice that. That's
Yeah,
brilliant.
yeah. Which is, the words of Paul Auster holding the whole book together.
Amazing.
Right? Yeah. Looks really good on the screen. It
Yeah,
looks like
it
a real
does.
typewriter. And there's a bunch of other sort of, Easter eggs hidden in here. I don't want to spoil everything, but
Did Chip Kidd, how much did he just kind of help you put that stuff together? Like all of your ideas, bring them all together?
yeah, extremely easy to work with, very, very generous. And just, I'd run some idea by him and he'd be like, well, no, we we can't have that. You've got to have type on the book cover, Paul. Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Um, uh, and then like I don't know anything about, really anything about type. So this beautiful, combination of typewriter and this very elegant font. That's like Chip's masterwork. And it's just kind of like, it's hard, I was thinking it could just be something like this.
Hmm.
This is really kind of makes it beautiful.
Yeah, it's very literary, and it's interesting. There's no forward or afterword or anything about it. There's nothing that gives you any context, or
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is something that like a regular, that just like a book would be
right.
like.
Right. I mean, I don't even think it ever occurred to me. Well, at a certain point, we're like, now there was some question from the publisher, or do we need a preface for
Mhm.
this? Because Spiegelman was so involved with City of Glass that when it was reissued, he wrote a preface or an introduction to that. But it just seemed irrelevant. I mean, the prose version, 3-in-1 version of New York Trilogy doesn't have a preface, so why should this one? Just sit
Yes,
down and read.
yes. It's very adult, it's a very like grown-up graphic novel.
Yeah, I hope it's not too adult.
Well, how did Paul see any of this before he
Yeah,
passed?
yeah, yeah. So Paul Auster died almost exactly a year ago, and it's it's I'm sorry, it's still hard to imagine him not a telephone call away.
Mhm.
Um, but he got to see the whole inside of the book. You know,
Wow.
he just didn't get to see the object of itself, but he saw and approved all of the final pages.
Wow, that's
So
wonderful.
yeah,
Glad
it's
I'm glad
wonderful.
you got to see that. And so you took on the last part. Was there any, you must have been super be like well, I'm gonna have to follow Lorenzo Matodi in this book. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, David Mazzucchelli and Lorenzo
yeah,
Matodi.
and then you're like, okay, here we go. I'm gonna take
Yeah,
this on. I mean, you know, was there any
insane.
hesitation about doing that?
Well, a huge hesitation, and I mean, I didn't. Honestly, Auster said you just draw it.
Mhm.
You know, the sketch we had some false starts, but eventually he just said just draw the thing. Uh, and I don't know whether he was just everyone at this point was kind of fed up with the whole project. I know Lorenzo was like, "Come on already,"
Yeah.
um, understandably. Um, and so I was just like, I hadn't even thought of it. I mean, I certainly didn't think that I was qualified to draw this last book. And honestly, Noah, I know that those guys tower over me. I have no illusions. You know, I decided I was going to make, these drawings look as different from them as possible. And since like I feel most comfortable drawing with this is how I draw like my New Yorker cartoons and any of my comics work in the last, 10 years or so has been drawn with a pencil. I feel just that's the tool that is the most comfortable for me. So I thought, okay, pencil and ink wash, that will look different enough that I won't be, you know, necessarily, it will make it look different enough
Hmm.
that maybe I can get away with this.
Well, I think you did a really terrific job, and I am a fan of your work, and even in the Stardust compilation, it's
Mhm.
your section at the very end of that I return to most. Um,
Wow, I really appreciate that. For me, that story at the end of the Fletcher Hanks book is one of the pieces of work that I'm proudest of. So
it's
thanks
great,
very much.
and also I can see the improvement from the ride along together.
Yeah,
Your
yeah,
artwork from, I mean,
yeah.
you're still improving. You're still striving to be a better cartoonist, which is like inspirational. So,
Thank
I
you.
mean, I don't think there's any, it's not jarring at all to sit down and read the whole book and then get to your section artistically. It all just kind of flows together for me, from my perspective. So I thought it was a good choice for you to take it on and to do it, and you pulled it off
I appreciate
amazingly.
that very much. Coming from you, I know that you've read a lot of comics, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and like I said, like the formal things that the trickery that you did with it and stuff,
yeah,
that stuff is inspiring to me. My brain just cannot think like that. I'm such a straight story kind of person where I'm just like, all right, I'll do a 6 panel grid and I'll just plug in the story here. I don't think about like how the story should be affecting the panel layouts or any, I need lessons in that stuff. I just don't, my mind doesn't work like that. So it's really fun to read that kind of thing and think, damn, like he actually thought of something. How did he think of this? Like that, oh, that's so interesting, So
Well,
yeah, great.
we all can improve. We all can use lessons. It's a matter of keeping your, you know, eyes open and just kind of trying to push it ahead. One of the things I was thinking about yesterday was listening to your interview with Seth was, how he started out and determined to get better
Hmm.
and determined to improve and looking at different artists in a different way
Mm.
and really trying to appropriate things. It's an educational process.
It
I see it with
is.
my students too, Uh, uh, I teach at the Rhode Island School of Design and at BU, and I'm going to start teaching my own online graphic novel lab. So I'm calling it graphic novel lab starting in August. But I see this in my students too, which is that they are they like a certain kind of comic and they just kind of focus in on that comic. And with the internet, it encourages the algorithms encourage you to read more of the same
Hmm.
kind of thing, if not more of exactly the same kind of thing. And just exposing them, like I just the other couple of weeks ago, I took my students at RISD to the library and I said, okay, here's the comic section. Choose out something that looks really weird to you, something you would never pick up. And I want you to take that home and copy some of it and figure out what's interesting about it because there's a reason why it's up here.
Yeah.
There's something interesting about it.
Yeah.
And it has a profound impact on them almost overnight, like being given the assignment of just looking at something that's outside of their comfort zone that is still comics.
Yeah.
The point
I,
being, like you
yeah.
to get back to is like we can all learn to become better cartoonists.
Yeah. And I'm only 40 years old. I got time. I just got to keep working.
You got a shitload of work for a 40-year-old cartoonist, man.
But I get weird, like New York Review of Comics sends me their stuff, and
Yeah,
so does D&Q and
yeah,
stuff.
it's
So I get a lot
great.
of stuff I wouldn't normally pick up that just
Yeah.
shows up. And one of the ones I'm looking at now is this
Oh, yeah.
book. Have you seen this? This is
I just saw it listed, but I haven't gotten a copy.
oh,
It's
it's
awesome, right?
one more question I wanted to ask you was
Yeah.
about the character design of narrator. Did you design that based off of Paul Auster, or how did you come up with the
For the
your main character in the locked
for
room?
my main character, well, I told you that Auster was pretty much just primarily concerned with the writing.
Hmm.
Most of his crit had to do with the language and that I had adapted. But in that last book, it seemed to me, if the first book is about the nature of fiction, and the second book is about the nature of reading fiction, the last book, The Locked Room, is primarily concerned with the craft of writing fiction and the life and death struggle that it can feel like. Death permeates that locked room, and it's an author locked with a typewriter, basically,
Hmm.
and struggling. And so I always thought that the narrator of that book was the most like Auster. And I felt like the narrator of that book was really kind of a first person. He doesn't give that character a name, which is interesting, an interesting challenge in the adaptation because I could never use the guy's name because Auster never uses his name, and I thought that that's a telling sign that this character is really Auster. So I was like, well, if the prose version of The Locked Room is Paul Auster, then the comics version of The Locked Room should be me.
Hmm.
And so I designed the character originally with sort of how I looked in my late 20s, mid to late 20s, with that
Uh-huh.
hair like this. And I gave him a pair of glasses, like the big, 80s glasses that I wore back then. And I showed the work and I did all of the drawing. And I showed Oster some at the beginning and then enough to show him then. And he was like, okay, this is great. This is great. Yeah, this is good. Okay, just finish the book. He'd kind of like, don't show it to me till you're done. Okay. And I came in and I'd done all, like 150 pages and the character's got on his glasses. And he's like, I love it, but that my character does not wear glasses. I'm like, oh, well, and I tried to explain. I thought, well, your character in the prose novel is Paul Auster. This is kind of a caricature of me. And he was like, what are you even talking about? Get rid of the glasses.
Wow.
And so I had to Photoshop out like hundreds of pairs of glasses in this book,
Oh no, man. That's a scary edit right there when somebody
right?
says, get rid of that. You're like,
Yeah,
but
let's
how
get rid of
many?
something that appears on every page.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh,
And
geez.
he was very firm about it,
Yeah.
which was, kind of, it really was a shock. But, it was, well, and in the process of taking it out, taking the glasses out, it was another chance to make the drawing better.
Hmm.
Because, like I say, my drawing, it's not like Metodi. You get the feeling you just look at Metodi drawing, he just sat down and drew it and done,
Mm.
right? But
Hmm.
I probably spend as much time in Photoshop as I do with analog, just drawing at the drawing board.
Wow.
All those pages are tweaked like insanely amount because I just don't have this security uh, in my rendering.
Hmm.
It's a funny story.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't, so the character is still essentially you, but without glasses. You in the 80s.
Yeah, yeah.
I love that detail. That's amazing. Okay, man. Thank you for
Okay.
giving me your time. It's been an hour.
Yeah, that's plenty.